Sad story there at the end of Fox News. David Cassidy's newest hit is I Think I Love Somebody. Bill Colley with you this morning and get set for a couple of hours of, radio programming that is not politically correct. And we're not worried about somebody being offended. Thanks for joining us today. It's 8:06. Good to have you here. A couple of things today that I wanted to remind you of coming up during the course of the program. Steve Millington will be along. He's joining us in a short while. He's the chairman of the Twin Falls County Republican Party. They have a big event Saturday night at Canyon Crest. For some of us, if the weather's good, it means just a short walk, although in my wingtips, I might get them a little muddy. Also coming up after 9 o'clock news this morning, Grant Lobes, our Twin Falls County prosecuting attorney, will join us in studio. There is a lot going on in Boise that is of interest to people who are in law enforcement, and prosecutors fit that bill as well. That's on the way just after 9 o'clock news this morning, and of course your telephone calls for both of those gentlemen coming up a little later in the show today. Couple of things I wanted to mention right off the top of the program. We didn't get to it yesterday, but there has been some controversy over the last several days. The First Lady, Melania Trump, helped open her husband's town hall, rally, if you will, rally in Florida the other day by reciting the Lord's Prayer. Now, depending on what church you go to, there are slight differences in it just because of translations, and that's not uncommon. But she recited the Lord's Prayer. Liberals quickly were angered by this. Well, whatever the Trumps do is going to anger liberals in this country. That's true. The Trumps, could get up on the right side of bed in the morning, and the liberals would be angry. If they got up on the left side of the bed, the liberals would still be angry. There's not going to be any pleasing of them over the next 4 to 8 years. Melania Trump, though, according to some liberals, they were mocking her because she had to read it. Well, I go to church on Sundays and I recite it without having to look at it. But every once in a while, if I'm distracted, I have a difficult time coming up with the right words. I used to go to church every day, but that was because I worked an afternoon drive at a radio station, and so I had the time to go to daily mass, and I would do that. So I was used to reciting it. We have a couple of other things that just the wording has changed just enough at my church and some of our responses that I now have to read them off because your mind gets trained to learn something. It's like typing. If we suddenly change the keyboards tomorrow, a lot of us would have a really difficult time because, we've spent 40, 50 years typing one particular way on a keyboard. And that's how memory works through that repetition. Melania Trump, first of all, English is not her first language. She speaks several languages, but English is not her first language. And she had a worldwide audience, radio and television audience, and internet too. Many places are now streaming the president's events live. So I don't blame her for reading it in this type of situation. Not your first language, you might be a little nervous about it. So the liberals were very catty about that, of course. But then they were angered that here in a country that Barack Obama said we had an atheistic government. In other words, he's referring to the fact that the government has no established church. But that doesn't mean that Americans are atheists in any way. What it means is that Americans, and I wanted to emphasize this today. It's also related to the column that I wrote for Times News. If you've not yet seen that today, I would recommend you take a look at the newspaper or its website and read through that. But America is a Christian culture. Now, a lot of people don't go to church anymore. A lot of people out there don't really believe any longer. But why would I say America is a Christian culture? Because if you look at our laws and all of our founding documents, these things were informed by 2,000 years of Christianity in Europe. The documents that we are governed by are direct from the Enlightenment, Age of Enlightenment, which is direct from the Protestant Reformation, which was simply a lot of people saying, you know what, this Bible, I can read it on my own, and it says that I'm equal to the king and that God likes me just as much as he likes the king, loves us both, and therefore I have certain rights that are guaranteed by God. So even if you don't go to church and even if you don't believe in God any longer, this is why the United States has the culture it has, and respect for the rule of law. And we are a nation of laws and not a nation of men in the sense that we don't follow a Führer or a dictator or a king. We follow a constitutional set of laws and principles. Bill Colley with you on Top Story. And again, those influenced by our Christian heritage. Last night, Franklin Graham was appearing on Sean Hannity's program on the Fox News channel. And if you could for a moment, I'd like you to take a listen to his thoughts about all of this. The liberals hate him. They hate Franklin Graham for what he stands for, and they claim that he's exclusionary because he believes that the Bible is the Word of God, and of course liberals believe when it comes to religious faith, it's like going into a grocery store for them. Well, if Folgers is on sale this week, I'll buy that. But if it's Maxwell House at a better price, I'll buy that. But gee, chock full of nuts is pretty cheap. So what's the difference? In the liberals' mind, any religious faith is bad. But if you've got to have one, just pick one off the shelf. That's all you need to do. And then confine it to your own personal life once a week and don't tell me about it ever. Funny that, that at one time that the Graham family, no one in media would have dared criticize them. But we've moved that far in the last 10 or 15 years where the morally debauched have taken over the media. And so now it's open season on anybody who actually, and Franklin Graham running the charity Samaritan's Purse doesn't even matter to these liberals. I mean, he does more for the poor than anybody at the New York Times has ever done. Take a listen to Graham, though, as he praises Melania Trump for opening with a prayer.
When Melania did this, I thought to myself, this is the first time in American history of politics, as far as I know, where the First Lady stood and recited the Lord's Prayer before she introduced her husband. I thought it was tremendous. And it resonated, Sean, with not only millions of Christians here across this country, but also around the world. I'm talking about Christians halfway around the world that saw that. That encouraged them to think that the First Lady would recite a prayer that the Lord Jesus Christ gave. And here she is reciting it before the whole world. I was so proud of her, and I just couldn't stop talking about it. I thought it was tremendous. And so I'm proud of her. I'm as proud as I can be of our First Lady. She's such a fine person. And of course, the left is going to attack. And Sean, they're going to do everything they can to try to beat up our president and his wife, the First Lady, his children. They're going after everybody. But there's millions and millions of Christians out there that stood behind President Trump, and they're going to continue to stand behind him. And I just hope he keeps going forward. I certainly hope that the First Lady is not discouraged because of the left who want to try to embarrass her some way. But she did a great job, Sean, a fabulous job.
A couple of things to keep in mind. A lot of people out there say, yeah, but he's been married 3 times, and his potty mouth and a number of things about him disqualify him for having any support from the conservative Christian community. But if you look back through the history of the Bible, Cyrus the Great was not a Christian, but he did a lot of great things for the people of God. And if you stand back for a moment, you think about that, then let's give Donald Trump a little slack. In fact, I was reading this morning where I believe Tuesday, that his government may rescind the Obama bathroom order. That is, remember, Barack Obama's White House wrote schools across the country last year and said, you got to let the girls and the boys shower and potty together. Well, Mr. Trump's office is apparently going to rescind that. Now, that doesn't end it, because in some liberal school districts, they still think that, promoting the use of shared bathrooms and shower stalls is a good thing. It takes precedence over reading, writing, and arithmetic. But whatever they want to do in those places, I suppose, Ketchum and some of those schools in that part of Idaho will continue to do this because they want to sexualize your children. But the rest of us won't have to be dealing with this any longer. And that also means you'll have a lot of cities around the country which have been pressured by various sports leagues that they will be able to go ahead and continue to live as they traditionally have. Now, related to all of this today, if you go to the Times News and you look at my newspaper column today, I make a reference to a lot of those liberal Christian denominations out there who are demanding that who was it? Oh, it was Governor Otter that I wrote it. I should know this. That they're demanding that he issue an apology because he said that if we have refugees come to this country, we should give preference to Christians. So all of these Christian leaders are demanding that he apologize, even though he has, other than making a suggestion like that, he has no influence over what happens. He's just saying, this is what I believe. So they're demanding that he say an apology because somebody's feelings out there may be hurt by that, and we should have everybody come here, all 7 billion people from around the world, even if some of them won't ever be able to adjust to living in our culture. because God said we should be kind to refugees. He did, but this is the same God as he led his people out of Egypt eastward to the land that he said would be theirs. He had them pretty much destroy every culture. That includes man, woman, and child, cattle, houses, cities that they encountered because he didn't want them polluted by separate cultures. And as I just mentioned a few minutes ago, we are a Christian culture in the way that we developed our laws and our government or governments. Then why wouldn't we want people like that here first who would adjust better than other people? Which is not to say we're insulting other people. I made a metaphor in the column where I talked about going for a walk on the Canyon Trail. On the north side of the city, it's an easy walk. You don't have to worry about somebody leaping out of the shadows and clubbing you over the head to take your wallet. But I was warned when I first moved here, if I'm walking the trail here on the south end of the city, be a little bit more careful. Now, is that offensive to the people we used to call bums? They're called homeless now, who are living in that canyon who might try to rob you? Well, I don't know that I'm trying to be offensive to them. I don't care if I am. But it's just common sense to walk the safer trail. And the safer trail right now, when it comes to refugee resettlement, would be, if you've got to do it, take the Christians first, who are being thrown overboard in boats sailing across the Mediterranean by the people we will be taking. Yeah, that's who I want living next door to me, cutthroats and murderers. Telephone number to reach our program today is 736-0300, 736-0300. Time to squeeze a caller in before the first break. Caller, you're up next. You're on Top Story on KLIX.
Good morning, Bill. You know, since we're not being politically correct and everything, and religion-wise, the people that are offended about Melania Trump reciting the Lord's Prayer, it's the devil in them that's making them offended. I mean, it's hurting them in their core because they're being hit in their core. We are a nation of Christians, and it is a fact. Ever since they started kicking God out of our country has gone downhill, and that's a fact.
Well, and thank you much for the call. I think a lot of us would tend to agree with that we've moved so far away from those values that we once had. And then we sit here, we wonder why we've got rampant crime in our cities and rampant drug use, rampant teenage pregnancy, families that are split apart. And yet liberalism just says, well, what's the big deal about all of that? It's only the building block of any culture is the family unit. What's the big deal about all of that? We're going to turn everybody into cross-dressers anyway and have one great big bacchanalia. Won't that be good? Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX and NewsRadio1310.com. Couple of guests coming up this morning. Steve Millington is the Twin Falls County Republican Party chairman. Grant Loebs will be joining us, too, as well, just after 9 o'clock news. He's the Twin Falls County prosecuting attorney. A lot to talk about. There were 100 bills apparently introduced in the state legislature last week, which I don't know if that's a record or not. But that's a lot. And a lot going on, a lot to talk about. All of that coming up on this program this morning. Wanted to point out we're looking at some cooler weather coming later this week. Now, the benefit of colder weather is that it's going to slow down some of the snow melt. Gosh, if you go to our website, newsradio1310.com, you can see some phenomenal videos and pictures of flooding, and our Facebook page, too, News Radio 1310 Facebook page. And we are dealing with, and it could get worse, but if we have a few of these occasional cool downs, it at least is going to help out as we head towards spring. But the colder weather also means you're still going to have some challenges for heating your home. And those are going to continue for a while, which is why I recommend you give the pros a call at Ramsey Heating and Electric in Burley. And the pros will come out and get the job done right and get it done right the first time. Problem-free cozy winters are found at Ramsey Heating and Electric, 2600 Overland Avenue in Burley. You can telephone them. The telephone number is 678-0459. That's Ramsey Heating and Electric, where they sell warm winters and cool summers. I'm looking forward to being able to talk about the cool summers when they sell those. So that may be a bit down the road yet. Before we get to Steve Millington in just a moment, he's joining us in studio until 9 o'clock this morning on News Radio 1310, KLIX and NewsRadio1310.com. Media still hot under the collar because President Trump has been yanking media's chain when it comes to his dealing, as if they don't do that to him, right? John Heilemann, who used to have a show on the Bloomberg Network for about 6 months until they realized nobody watches this guy, So they've given him a spare chair on MSDNC's Morning Joe, and he claims that because of Trump's rhetoric, I almost said President Trunk. Yes, he's a Republican, all right, big trunk like an elephant. I better clarify that. That's got nothing to do with his big hands. John Heilemann says that Trump is going to incite violence against the media.
Enemy of the people is pretty far outside the standard Republican playbook of attacking people like Nick Compasori at the New York Times and other places. And you know, there's administrations always take offense when they're criticized and challenged, but. I think part of the reason why you're seeing this bipartisan, and even inside the administration itself, is that this just seems kind of beyond the pale. Joe, my question for you is, you know, we all, I think most of the people at this table were alive and politically conscious at the time of the Oklahoma City bombings. And every time that Donald Trump uses this kind of language, I always worry that it's an incitement to elements of our country that might go ahead and do something when the President of the United States calls the press the enemy of the people, that they might take that seriously. Does that concern you?
In other words, Heilemann is saying somebody's going to blow up the New York Times or the Washington Post or CBS News because they're going to feel that Donald Trump is somehow telegraphing that telepathically to them. And I actually think media wants that, because then they can try to, blame more on Donald Trump and try to push him overboard. Got a caller with us very quickly. We'll squeeze a caller in here. Caller, you're up next on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com.
Well, this is the thing about the Oklahoma City bombings. If you remember, Clinton was president, and the attorney general was a big beastly woman from Florida. I forget her name.
Janet Reno.
Reno. Exactly. And they were doing things that were always on the very edge, pushing the issue. And there's the dynamic, the environment is not even remotely close. But you see, me, not necessarily you, but me, I'm a patriotic right-wing extremist who's capable of violence and extreme violence in their mind, which is very offensive.
Unlike
to me.
By the way, unlike the liberals at Berkeley.
Yeah, exactly. Well, this is one of the things I heard this statement yesterday, and I thought to myself, this is so appropriate for the liberal media and liberals in general. Why is it that people who can't take advice insist on giving it? And you see, everybody is so smart. Like yesterday, Bob Beckel on the 5 was so smart, and he's so sure of himself. I says, well, Bob, why didn't you run for president, and why didn't you win? The smartest man in the world right now is Donald Trump, because he did something that nobody said he could do, and he's actually following through. And I can't believe that his numbers aren't growing, and that people out here in America are becoming more and more pleased with what is going on. And I can't imagine how this is ever going to be a bad thing, only for the liberals. Thanks, Bob.
Thank you much for the call. And Beckel, whenever I hear him talking, I always wonder, is he 3 sheets to the wind, or is he sober today? Steve Millington joins us in the studio. And Steve, does media whine a little too much?
Well, they seem to have taken a real good drink out of the whining bottle the last 6, 8 weeks, 2 months, 3 months. For some reason, the one of the things that Trump did was he played the media against themselves, and he got more free advertising during his presidential campaign than ever recorded in history, because every time he would say something, the media would go ballistic on it and repeat it over and over and over. He got more airtime, a free, unpaid airtime.
I read this morning where subscriptions to a lot of the big newspapers are way up, and it's attributed to Trump and their coverage of him.
That's and the people want to just see what they're saying. As far as the polls not showing him leaping way up, I've never had a lot of confidence in the polls in the first place. And number two, if those polls are centered either on the west coast of the United States or the east coast of the United States, they're going to be extremely prejudicial. What they need to do is run a poll that goes from Texas to Montana.
Yeah.
And let's see what those guys think about this deal. And then I think you'd see a lot different results from those polls.
We've got more with Steve Millington coming up in just a moment. A quick note, tomorrow morning, one of the medical professionals from Tripp Family Medicine here in Twin Falls is going to be in studio with us between 8:30 and 9 o'clock. We do it every Wednesday morning, and it's an opportunity for you, if you've got a medical issue, to actually speak to one of the pros over the telephone and get some free advice, which you might not get if you have to go to the office. They might give you a bill. Not saying that they would do that, but they're very nice people. They still have to make a living, of course, as we all do. Tripp Family Medicine still looking for new patients. In fact, if you're looking for a doctor, this is the perfect opportunity. And they can often see you, often being the key word, on the very same day if you call in the morning with an issue. Tripp Family Medicine, located on Fillmore Street in Twin Falls, directly across from the main post office, and life's too short not to feel good. More with Steve Millington on the way in just a moment. It's 41. Bill Colley with you as well on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com.